Yeah, so if you want to just introduce yourself and tell people who you are and I guess a little bit of a backstory about you.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you so much for having me on. I love to talk about Bitcoin, and so it's kind of my mission these days. So I think the more opportunities we have to share stories and to show different faces in Bitcoin that I think make it more accessible to other people. So my background, as you mentioned, is TradFi. So but it's a mix of experiences. So I started out on Wall Street. That was my first career right out of college, which is what I really wanted to do, and worked at Merrill Lynch for a number of years and started out as an individual broker and then moved into the managed money section and management because frankly, I wanted to move from Florida to New York and work actually on Wall Street instead of in the Wall Street realm. And so that was a rewarding career for a while until I just really felt that it just wasn't fitting my soul and I wanted to do something different. I wasn't sure what that was. And just through Secur's route, I ended up in Mexico and just to take a break and figure out what I wanted to do. And I basically have never left Mexico. So I started from that point on, I guess I would be considered an entrepreneur. So I started a business in, marketing, and I worked for the Mexican government in tourism marketing and was introduced to a developer that developed the Punta Mita resort community, where I was very much a part of that for its initial 10 years of development. And we were trying different things, but, when I was doing my marketing company, I was introduced to the internet and became a really early adopter in internet technologies. And that really just struck a chord with me. So from that point on, I was fascinated in technologies and what the potential was, especially leaving the US, going to Mexico and having the difficulty in communications and being able to access information, that the internet really eased that and allowed communication in a different way. And so, as I started seeing technology evolving and companies starting in the US, once it became a little bit more easy or economical for a company to start, I understood that same opportunity would be available in Latin America, and even more so just because of the demographics in Latin America versus the US and just the lack of access to opportunities. I thought it opened doors. So I ended up starting a venture capital fund. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, very much focused on entrepreneurs that are based in Mexico and LATAM, but with global opportunities and just taking advantage of solving some of the problems that exist in the region relative to education, to communication, to transportation, and to financial opportunities. And so that's been my trajectory. But since 2020, I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2012 and owned it since 2013. And so I've really, come to view it as an important financial technology. And now I just really want to work for Bitcoin. And I just think it's such an important financial protocol and technology that I feel that it's the most important use of my time today. So that's what I'm working on.
That's fascinating. I've got a few questions actually about your career background, and then I want to just touch on your last point about Bitcoin. But why did you end up doing marketing? Was that what you were doing in TradFi, or was that a complete career pivot? And if so, why? Why that path?
Well, in Merrill Lynch, I think marketing was how when I started at Merrill Lynch as a broker, I was 21 years old. And so in order to get any client to listen to me, I understood the power of the media. So I ended up talking to a local TV station and getting on TV as a financial advisor and also doing the stock market report on a local radio show. And so I understood the power of media and communications in order to elevate it. It wasn't that I knew any more than I did before. And people would still have the same hesitation about working with me, except for the fact that I was on TV and I was on the radio and I wrote for local newspaper and magazines. So being a media personality, I think, just shifted my thoughts about how important media and communication and marketing is. So everything I did from that point on was touched on that. But when I moved to Mexico, frankly, being able to write a sentence in English and spell every word correctly was a skill set that was lacking. There were retirees that would move to Mexico, but there were very few people my age group that would move to Mexico and change their life. And so it just offered an opportunity. And I was in Puerto Vallarta, which is a tourism destination. So to be able to communicate effectively to the clientele that they were trying to reach was just a skill set and opportunity that I took advantage of.
Huh, interesting. And so to get back to your point about Bitcoin, when you said it's a really interesting technology and you want to focus on it, you sort of talked a little bit about your experience with the internet. How would you compare and contrast Bitcoin with the internet?
Well, I see a lot of parallels, and I mean, I was a very early adopter to the internet. When I was introduced to the internet, it was just black screen text. So it was very early on, but I immediately saw the power of it being able to offer open communications. And I couldn't get my head around the fact that nobody owned the internet. And so I did end up leaving Mexico and going back to Chicago, and I ended up joining an internet startup. And so learned to code, and we were, I think, one of the first companies to link databases with HTML to serve up content on a more immediate basis. I mean, we're talking very early days.
Wow.
But there are so many parallels I see, because there was so much hesitation among traditional companies with the internet. And they said it's just for kids and it's just for music. And it was really very, rudimentary in terms of the design and the look and the user experience. And it was hard to dial up. It was slow. And so I look at the opportunities with Bitcoin. I look at Bitcoin as the first time we really had value on internet and distributed value. So I think it's the missing component to internet and a distributed, decentralized technology, in that it really provides the exchange of value. And we've been missing that previously. And there have been so many attempts to add that in, but Bitcoin really offers that. And I think so it has multiples of opportunities beyond internet, and what internet did for communication and information opportunities. That's what Bitcoin has as a financial protocol and as a financial technology has the power to do for value, and on a much more even basis. So I look at the technologies of it, the cryptography, and how they've solved all the problems, and just feel it just is, has tremendous potential.
And you're writing a book about Bitcoin, so it's called DeFiant Finance: Why Bitcoin is Inevitable. Can you talk a bit about what inspired you to write that book and why now?
Yes, I think one of the reasons is since I've been in the space for such a long time, I have a lot of people that ask me about it, or I'm talking about it. And as I've clarified my thoughts, I just felt it was important to kind of put in one space how I think about it and where I think we have the opportunity to go. I do think it's an inevitable shift in finance. I think that in the last, especially 3 years, we've had just an unprecedented irresponsibility in fiscal policy globally. And so I think that one of the things about Bitcoin, the fixed amount, will enforce kind of a financial discipline that we're lacking right now. And I think that the state that we're in, the kind of unlimited printing of money in order to solve problems, is not a healthy place to be. And I think that there will be enormous problems that will come from that. But yet Bitcoin is the counterpart to that by having a fixed supply and requiring us to kind of, if you will, live on a budget. I mean, none of us have the ability to just spend unlimitedly without, adherence to a budget as an individual or as a household or even as a company, but our governments are doing this. And so Bitcoin kind of enforces more of getting back to a limited supply or a fixed supply. DeFiant Finance is really how Bitcoin is, it's defiant in that it is bucking the trend of central bank currencies. And I think it is, but it defiant in a good way. It's almost like standing up to oppressors or to people who are, or to entities that are not healthy for you. So I think that DeFiant Finance just shows a way that we have a brighter future. So it kind of codifies what I think about it. And it basically hits on 5 things. One, it talks about money and how we all, what is money, which I think is kind of the central starting point that you need to have to really understand Bitcoin. And then it talks about how it encourages self-sovereignty and how by being in control of your own wealth and your own financial empowerment, it just leads to opportunities. And from that, national sovereignty, how it has the ability to break kind of the shackles of financial colonialism and give opportunities for countries that have been really under the thumb of some of the Western economies. It's a different sort of colonialism that we've shifted into after World War I, but I think it still exists in many ways that it has historically throughout the ages. And then it just talks about opportunity, how it creates a more even sense of opportunity. I think this whole shifting of wealth to, anytime you have a concentration of wealth amongst the higher and a distribution where you just have such a big divide, historically, it leads to real problems from a social standpoint. And so Bitcoin can help alleviate this by giving a more even playing field and by providing opportunities. And then I also explore how it changes individuals, because I do find that people in the Bitcoin community, that once you learn Bitcoin, it really leads you to question things like what are your values and time preference and truth, and what is, and it just has you thinking differently about so many aspects of life and family and culture. So that's basically the book to kind of codify that. And then, hopefully it's just a different voice. I'm lending a different voice. There aren't a lot of women working in the space and writing about it. So if I can reach a different audience than has been reached by other great authors and wonderful books that are in the community right now, but I just hope to just lend a slightly different perspective from, my years of Wall Street, from my working between US and a Latin American country, and just what I've seen and how I've experienced that. So hopefully I'll be able to just kind of broaden the audience of who might feel that they, want to become a little bit more curious about Bitcoin and how it might help them.
Do you think that is your book sort of targeted at women, or do you think that it just might appeal to women more because of the style that it's written in?
It's not targeted to women specifically, but I do think that my voice will be different perhaps than other voices. So just naturally, so I do hope that I'll reach a number of women in just what I have to offer women, and then also an older demographic, and a demographic that might be fearful of technology and might not understand this and might resist it or reject it automatically because they don't understand it, and why they should be paying attention to it as, if not for themselves and for, just for their children and for their legacy.
You talked a bit about you've mentioned twice about the opportunities that Bitcoin creates. Can you expand on that a little bit, as in, what kind of opportunities do you think it creates and for whom, outside of the obvious sort of with the throwing off the shackles of colonialism is obviously a big one, but can you talk about other sort of demographics or opportunities that there might be?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is the only technology, is kind of the only opportunity I've seen in the history of wealth creation where individuals have really been leading the adoption versus those already in power or with money. And so I look at even the last 20 years or 30 years, and there are, venture capital has been just a great driver of wealth creation and technology investing. And that has been really kind of held by a specific few. So I think that, Bitcoin, it's interesting. It's almost like many people haven't gotten the memo, or they haven't understood what the value of it is. So it's allowed this adoption on a global basis. And you look at some of the countries where it's most widely adopted, like, in India and Nigeria, Venezuela, Argentina, places that and other countries in Africa. I mean, places that really need financial inclusion and financial opportunities. And so this has just, really kind of skewed the playing level, where those who have a need for it are adopting it more rapidly than those in the West that already have wealth. So even in the United States and in Europe, and I think we're Canada, where we have wealth, it's kind of the plebs who are adopting it. It's either the cypherpunks or technology people, but it's not the Wall Streeters who have been adopting it. Only in recent weeks, we're seeing them starting to come around and starting to open their eyes to it. But I think up until now, there's just been this fantastic opportunity for those who've never really had a chance at acquiring great wealth to do so. So that's I think that's an interesting shift in opportunities. Even the whole accredited investor system, which really drives me a little bit bonkers, because I just think it just encourages more concentration of wealth with those who have it. That Bitcoin, anybody can buy it at any amount, and it's so easy to download a wallet. I mean, I often will help somebody that an Uber driver or wait staff to just download a wallet and tip them a few sats and just get them on their Bitcoin journey, because I just think it's so it's easier than people think it is. And once you start, then I think it's great to become part of the whole community of Bitcoin and understand the opportunities that it provides.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're recording this. I think it's a day after all of the social media feeds just flooded with Larry Fink from BlackRock talking about Bitcoin and making lots of positive comments. So, I mean, I suspect he's been pro Bitcoin for much longer than he's letting on.
Well, and I have heard that I actually made a comment on one of the social media feeds, because even the way he's explaining it, I'm not sure he really gets it. I think he's still looking at it in a very limited lens. So I would love to have a conversation with him to just explain the broader perspective. But I think we all come to it in a slightly different way. And I do think that, looking at it from a financial asset is how many people come to it. But then you start understanding the broader perspective it has and some of the opportunities and just the empowerment that it provides. So, yeah, I do. But it's making it easier for me to talk to some of my peers who have been looking at me like just the crazy Bitcoin, like what happened to Lynne? She's just gone off the deep end with this. And I even had a girlfriend say, maybe you don't want to talk about it too much at this party tonight, and so because there is that sense among that it's used for exactly what Larry Fink was saying, that it was used in for illegal activities, or it's boiling the oceans, or you just have these automatic rejections of it from traditional financial communities. And so this makes it easier to kind of break through that and say, hey, well, what does he know that I don't know? Or what am I missing about this? So it will make conversations easier.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, though, how the narrative seems to be shifting. Can you talk about your Bitcoin journey then? So how you actually discovered it? So you've been in it for a really decent amount of time. I mean, 2012 is like you're an OG basically, but how did you discover Bitcoin? And then what was your path into kind of becoming such an enthusiast, I guess?
Yeah, and I think my path may be a little bit different than most. I mean, most of the people I hear, they were introduced to it and they kind of rejected it, and then they forgot about it or whatever. But I wasn't that way. As part of my venture fund, Meet to Ventures, I held a conference each year called the Meet to Tech Talks. And the purpose of that was to introduce Silicon Valley and other investors to the opportunities that were going on in Latin America and Mexico in particular. It's a small conference held in Punta Mita, Mexico, but a very, curated audience, and we limited it, and we had really exceptional speakers over the years. And so I was introduced through one of my investors to Shak Khan, and Shak is known as he's an investor and an entrepreneur, and he was an advisor early on to Daniel Ek from Spotify. And so I thought he was suggested as a speaker. I thought he would be speaking about Spotify. And we got on a call to just talk about his participation. This was in late 2012. And he said, well, what I'd really like to talk about is Bitcoin. Do you know about Bitcoin? And I said, I do not. And he was just about to launch CoinDesk, which he launched in April 2013. And he had been introduced to Bitcoin and couldn't find a source of information. So he decided to start one. And he said, if I'm questioning this, probably other people, because there's Reddit and there's, the deep tech, community, the cypherpunk community, but not for more normal people. And the way he described it to me, I was immediately fascinated. I thought of it as math money. And having been so early in the internet and just grasping onto that, I saw this as internet money or math money. And I loved the idea of the fixed supply. And I loved the idea that it was mathematically based. And so I immediately read the white paper. I wanted to get some. I wanted to own it. I thought it was a long shot if it would be adopted. But I did think that the probability, and being an early stage tech investor, I understood the opportunity if you get in early. But I was living in Mexico, and Coinbase had just started operations, but I guess I didn't have the right VPN or something, but I couldn't get it open until I actually physically went to the United States and could transact on a US, ISP and buy and open my account and buy it. So I ended up buying it in February 2013, but I was struggling. I mean, I didn't have the network to buy peer-to-peer at that time, although I'm sure I could have, but it wasn't easy to buy. And then by the time Shot came and talked to the conference, I mean, I think it was at like $60 when we talked. It was around $120 when I purchased it, and it was about $250 when we had the conference. It was about $1,100 by the end of the year. And then, Bitcoin, it goes up and down and up and down. But I was fascinated with it, and I was also fascinated with the potential of it. And so from that point on, I followed it, and, I was building my own venture fund and involved in other tech. So, but I did keep an eye on it all those years, and along with other digital assets, Ethereum when it first launched, and many others. But it's just, I kept coming back to Bitcoin because, it is truly the only one that's decentralized and didn't have its own kind of management team or offering behind it. And so increasingly, I'm a curious person, so I explore all the other options and keep an open mind, but I have never found anything like Bitcoin, so I keep coming back to that. But I think along my journey, I mean, I looked at it as a financial asset, and it really wasn't until, and math money, but until 2020, that's when I really found the Bitcoin community, when everybody was stuck at home, and I was introduced to Clubhouse and then later Twitter Spaces, but just being able to talk to other people who were curious about it and invested in it, and then explore these other facets of Bitcoin, like Alex Gladstein's work from the Human Rights Foundation has been incredibly informative to how I'm thinking about it now, and really broadening my perspective. So I'm very grateful to him for shedding light on things that I really was very ignorant about, but thought I knew about, living in emerging countries, but just didn't know how the system operates and how broken money can really hinder opportunities globally, and how Bitcoin has the opportunity to really correct some of those wrongs.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you can kind of exist in that system and not really understand it. I mean, for me, my kind of orange pill journey, my mum actually sent me a video, and it was like an hour and a half interview that Jordan Peterson was doing with 4 Bitcoiners. And I thought I understood Bitcoin quite well. I mean, I'm really embarrassed to say this, but so my orange pill really happened in July 2021. I had known about Bitcoin since about December 2011 because my husband had discovered it and was talking about it and was like all excited about it. And I was just like, that sounds really boring. And he was working on a project actually to do a sort of smart contract type thing with a friend of his. And then, they ended up canning it. He never bought any, unfortunately. But for me, it was just, what was insane about it was I watched this video and I was listening to Robert Breedlove talk about, Bitcoin and all the rest of it and the sort of theories behind it. And I just thought, oh my God, I've been in financial markets for nearly 20 years and I just haven't understood money. And it was just such a shock to the system that then I just went deep down the rabbit hole, really. So I think when Alex Gladstein was talking about the IMF and the World Bank, and he made a comment saying, most of the employees in those banks, in those organizations probably don't realize like what's actually happening with what they're doing and what the actual outcome is of their actions. And I kind of could empathize with that, because I can see how you can be a cog in a system and just have no idea. It's just a massive wake-up call.
Chris, I promise you, had I not lived in Mexico for a number of years by the time I was introduced to it, I don't think I would have moved as quickly. But really early on when I moved, I think it was like a few months after I moved and transferred cash into Mexico, they had a devaluation. And so I lost 50% overnight. And that was, being from Wall Street, that was a huge wake up call. And it's like, they can't do that. And it's like, actually, they can. And then, standing in line for 2 hours to pay a bill because the bill will never arrive on time to your address because of the mail service, and having to wire funds to an employee for an emergency basis, and they needed it via Western Union, and having to open an account at Western Union and then send it down and have to pay I think it was a 40% fee. And I'm like, having experienced these abuses in the system for, people who are less financially empowered or who are out of the system, out of the typical system, opened my eyes to not everybody operates on the same level. And so I think had I not understood that was part of my, when I was introduced to Bitcoin, the remittance aspect was a big, I could immediately see the benefits of that, and then moving funds on an immediate basis. And now even more so with Lightning. I just think that's still an incredibly underappreciated opportunity.
Yeah, massive. So you invest in this space, and I guess you see a lot of early stage companies, and particularly having a kind of technical mindset. You've seen the evolution of this technology really from its inception, more or less. I mean, a few years in. What's your sense about how developed the technology is and what the opportunities are now versus 10 years ago?
Well, I would say it's not that I'm an investor today in it, but I've been an investor in early stage companies. And within the LATAM market, fintechs and financial technologies and neobanks have been a big part of that. So I wouldn't classify myself as an investor, but I'm incredibly curious about the opportunities. And I think it's one of the best, one of the unparalleled opportunities of our time is to, number one, encourage companies to build on the Bitcoin financial technology protocol and its adjacents like Lightning or Arc, which I'm studying now. Even the communications platforms like Nostr. So I think that there are decentralized offshoots from Bitcoin, with Bitcoin being the core. So I think it's really early. I'm investigating it, to be quite honest. I know that there are great companies that are evolving, and I'm tracking those. There's a handful of VC funds that are specialized in Bitcoin technologies. And I think it's a great way to be focused solely on Bitcoin, because I think the opportunity is going to be massive. And I don't think you can mix that sort of investing with other investing, like a Web3 or even AI or traditional types of investing. So I think having a Bitcoin lens or Bitcoin focus, there's going to be plenty of opportunities coming up. But part of it is just letting the startups know, we're having, in the space, I think there's still a lack of developers that are developing on Bitcoin or that understand it. And even more so now with Lightning, but it's growing, and I think people will understand the opportunities. So I think part of what I want to do is help educate entrepreneurs to the incredible opportunities that there are by paying attention to this as a financial technology and what opportunities can come from it, and then supporting the investors that are already, working in the space by sharing opportunities. I don't think there are many. Most of the investors are in the US or UK. And I don't think there are any investors that I know of. In fact, my counterparts in the VC world, when they see something related, they're sending it to me now, knowing that I'm kind of the Bitcoin person in the region. But I think that it's really early days, but I think the opportunity is tremendous. So,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that we've got a lot of, technology and startups really solve problems, and Bitcoin's adoption is a factor of it being not so easy for many people I think you can understand it, but when you go to use it, the whole idea of self-custody or the user experience is not great, even today. And so I think by, thinking of opportunities and thinking of ways to have education and adoption and ease of use is going to just encourage more usage, and it creates great opportunities for startups.
Do you see the main opportunity being in that kind of payment space and the payment rails, and providing sort of an interface that makes the whole experience of purchasing and holding Bitcoin easier? Or are there other investment opportunities that you see outside of that? Or sort of business opportunities, I guess, that would turn into investment opportunities?
Well, I think that there's a number of things, and sometimes, just like the early internet, everybody was just like sticking a magazine on top of the web and making you turn the page on the, it's just like not knowing what the power of the technology is. So I'm not saying that I understand the depth of the technology and what it might evolve into, but the areas that I think are important are, number one, usability. So making, while it's like, just intuitive or easy to upload, easy to use. The self-custody aspect, I think, is what, especially with as many failures of exchanges that we've seen, people don't really differentiate between an FTX or a Celsius and a Swan or a River or an Unchained that are truly great custodials, and Bitcoin only companies. But I do think that, how to explain to people where their money can be safe or why you need to self-custody or how you do it in a secure way. I think as we get into more adoption by older generations and by family offices, by corporations, and by endowments or universities or pension plans, you're going to have custodial issues that are going to make it kind of impossible to self-custody in the traditional sense, because they have legal precedents that they can't just hold that asset. So how do we get around some of those? Those will be problems to solve. I also think identity verification, I don't know that this is specific to Bitcoin, but I do think that as we have this proliferation, but I think the blockchain and having a verifiable private key, public key is one way of verifying identity that, as we see AI proliferate, and it's so easy to have a copy of yourself, or people clone yourself, the bots. I mean, I have so many bots that copy my Twitter account and it looks exactly like me. And how do they do that?
You've arrived when that happens.
I can't imagine what Michael Saylor goes through. And he says I think he pays somebody just to get rid of the bots or to do that. But how you verify identity, I think it's just going to be an increasing problem as time goes on. And so there must be a way of having that on there. But I also think there are tremendous opportunities in the whole space of Lightning payments and micropayments. I mean, I just think our entire economy can shift to, think about Netflix and Hulu and Apple TV and all these you pay these monthly fees, but how many times do you watch anything? But yet you want to watch Ted Lasso and you want to watch, Only Murders in the Building. So you have to have the 2 subscriptions. And so, but if you could just pay through micropayments for the time that you watch or for the shows that you watch or the movies that you want to see, that's incredible. Just like streaming music, instead of paying a Spotify and a SoundCloud or whatever, that you only pay for the things that you use. And that's, I think, and in what you read in terms of newspaper articles or magazine articles. So I think that opens up a whole new opportunity. And it also encourages better entertainment, better journalism, better writing. So it rewards those who really add value. So the whole value to value economy, I think, is tremendous. And that's powered by Bitcoin on the Lightning Network and micropayments. And even with work, I think it changes employment. I think it's really difficult to gauge unemployment figures today. I think so many people have left the workforce, but they're not necessarily not working. They're just working in different ways, or they become part of the creator economy. And if you can receive payments and micropayments and just small fractions, it just really unleashes all kinds of opportunities. So I'm very excited about all of that. And I think that's the second step from having a Bitcoin wallet and holding Bitcoin and then being able to convert it into Lightning or using your own currency. And then I'm also, being in a region, and of course in Latin America, there are 21 countries in Latin America, and you've got some like Mexico that have an incredibly strong economy. In fact, the Mexican peso the US dollar has decreased 20% versus the Mexican peso so far in 2023. Now, obviously it's not in the news that much, but let me tell you, I know that that's true. It's gone from 21 pesos to the dollar to, I think it hit 16 yesterday, but it's around 17. And then you have Venezuela and Argentina, which have massive inflation. So there are different countries and different problems to solve in the region, but having a stable coin, a US dollar equivalent, or whatever the standard of currency is, which is the US dollar today. But the US dollar is complicated for many countries to obtain. It's expensive. You have to wire it. It doesn't trade. I mean, the currency exchanges or the banks don't operate on weekends or at night. So to have a digital asset that's based on a stable equivalent to the dollar is a necessity in regions outside of the US.
That's interesting. What do you think about stable coins as a concept? Because I know that Alex Gladstein often makes the case that they're very needed. So if you live in a country where, you're perhaps using the dollar, you actually can't deal with the volatility of Bitcoin because you're not a hodler. You're getting your your wages and you need to spend them, but you need them to not be jumping up and down in value. Like, how do you see the use of stable coins? Do you think they will be a temporary transition to a Bitcoin standard, or do you think that they will always exist?
I think at today they're essential, and I think unless you come up with like a digital version of the dollar, not as necessarily a CBDC, but a digital dollar that trades, that's available 24/7, that is on the same no fee payment that stablecoins are operating under. But it's just the way economies outside of the U.S. work in different regions. You have transactions that are based in dollars. Like you look at Argentina, they've had 100% inflation in the past year. And if you're a business transacting, you have to wire funds to a company to make your payment, but your pesos, and you can only, receive a X amount of dollars legally per month. Then you have to go to the black market and get them. And then by the time you wire transfer, you're not covering your bills that are based in US dollars. So a stable coin is an essential form of transactions today in most parts of the world. And so I agree with Alex. And I had a hard time thinking about it at first, like, why do you need it? But you absolutely need it because of the 24/7, 365 day settlement access, and because of the low fees for transaction and the immediate settlement. So that's the thing. Even with a US dollar, with a wire transfer, or a credit card payment, there's the ability to retract. So the immediate settlement aspect of stablecoins is what really makes it valuable and worthwhile.
Interesting. I'm curious as well, just to know about the whole situation with LATAM. So what does the Bitcoin adoption, for example, look like from where you're sitting in, say, Mexico versus the US? Is it that people understand the problems of the monetary system there better, and therefore the adoption is much more rapid, or what's your sense?
Well, over the years, and Bitcoin adoption was a little bit slower. The first exchanges in Mexico opened up around 2014, but there was an immediate rush to it. And the stocks are not broadly held in Mexico. There is a stock exchange, but within about 6 or 8 months, there were more people that were owning Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin was about I can't remember if Ethereum launched too, but Bitcoin certainly, there were more people with accounts on Bitso than there were holders of accounts at the Bolsa, the Mexico Stock Exchange, within a period of about 8 months. So people were really gravitating toward a way to save or invest. And, in Mexico also, real estate isn't an option that's as easy because all real estate transactions are in cash. So fewer people have the ability.
Are they really?
Yeah, throughout most of LATAM, frankly. I mean, there have been only recently, facilities with some of these neobanks and opening up lending for home purchases. But really, that's in the last 5 or 10 years. But prior to that, everything was 100% cash. So, and pretty much throughout LATAM. So, and throughout the region, it's very different. So in Mexico, I would say there was a quick adoption to Bitcoin, and then everyone got very distracted. Ethereum and Web3 is very big here, with a lot of looking for get rich quick, or, what other opportunities are there. So there is a sense at Bitcoin. I mean, there's a core community, but other than that, I think we kind of battle with how to educate on the, why Bitcoin is so much different. But there clearly is an understanding with devaluations, with historically high inflation rates, with inherent distrust of the government. So those are natural issues, which I think, and very few people being banked in the region too. So I think it's a natural. Countries like Venezuela and Argentina have very high rates of adoption of Bitcoin because they are living in an environment of very unsound money, and recognizing how important Bitcoin as a sound asset is, and also the ability to mine. So there have been significant, mining communities on an individual basis in these countries.
Where you see the Bitcoin adoption, where the currencies are very volatile or their value is plummeting, are people typically just putting their wealth in the Bitcoin, or are they using it to have sort of circular economies where they're exchanging, buying goods from each other with Bitcoin?
I think I think they go first into a stable coin, Tether, and specifically. And so one of the startups that I've been working with out of Argentina even prior to this 100% inflation. But and he was pretty Bitcoin focused initially, but has expanded to other currencies just because of demand. But he said if they have Tether on Lightning, that would really be a game changer for them. So Tether is the most accepted stablecoin down there, and then people will save or invest in Bitcoin or other cryptos. But the idea of that is to build wealth and to be a counter against the devaluing assets that they have. But for transactional purposes, they need something that is better than their currency in terms of being more stably tied to like a US dollar as a sounding as a point. But it really depends. You have to transact. And so I mean, even I think in Venezuela, they were trading coffee beans for food because coffee beans were holding their value better than the currency. So, we can't really imagine that. But I have to say, I mean,
it's coming.
It's coming. And, when I first started my career, the prime rate was 21.5%. And so, people forget in the 70s and all, it's like we had really high interest rates. And so, we've been
there
spoiled.
were, but the debt wasn't so bad. I think that's the issue. It's like the high interest rates combined with the high debt is really where the problem lies, I think, for most people.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. That is hindering our ability. I mean, I think there are two factors. One is the debt, because we will hit, the debt spiral of being able to, I mean, the Fed is talking about increasing rates another couple of times this year. And, with every increase in interest rate, that just increases the amount of money that they need to repay. But the other thing is the inability to really do what's necessary to fix the problem. So Volcker was, a hated man. You had to have security, and they really made hard choices, and it was a painful process to go through to try and fix the inflation. But in this day and age, we also had two political parties that more or less got along. They had differences, they had different policy opinions, but there wasn't the us against them that you see in the current scenario today. So no one wants to be the party that says we're going to make the hard choice. We're going to, really fix inflation. No, everyone's going to keep spending. I mean, it's either by increase in spending or increase in tax cuts. So it's the same result either way. And unless you really make hard choices, which I don't, see anyone really stepping up to suggest making.
Yeah, no, that's true. If there's so much Bitcoin adoption then in the LATAM region, how much sort of technology development is going on there? Because I would have thought that a lot of the startups would be very focused then on making technology to support the Bitcoin ecosystem. Is that the case?
You have little pockets. Again, most of them have been in the terms of exchanges, and we're seeing more and more like Ibex Mercado bringing Lightning to the market. I'm starting to mentor a company that's out of actually El Salvador, but expanding into Mexico, that is also bringing more tools and adopting, and we'll have lending, like short-term lending, like credit card lending attached to Bitcoin-based bank and holdings. So you're starting to see more. But one of the things that people forget is that you really need investors and role models in order to support a startup ecosystem. So, when I first started in the startup ecosystem in Mexico in 2012, and 2014, around that realm, there were very few startups in Mexico. There were lots of needs, there were lots of talented people, but they didn't have role models, and most of the development was taking place in the US. So once you started having startups and a whole community and an ecosystem, then you started and investors to support that. Then you saw the growth, the explosion of growth in the ecosystem in terms of startups. So I think we'll see kind of the same thing. I think that investors have shied away from investing in Bitcoin-based companies. The whole know your customer, I mean, the whole FUD that exists in financial markets, investors in Mexico and LATAM in general are much more conservative, and they come out of more private equity and family offices, and people who have traditionally been, they want to make sure that they stay away from any tinge of being involved in narco trafficking or things like that, or money laundering. And so they're conservative in traditional technology, and so they're very conservative in Bitcoin technology. So I think companies, the venture funds that are starting, that we see like ego death and 1031 and Stillmark, that when they start having some wins, and you'll see other venture funds say, hey, I need to be a part of that too. But I really hope to help accelerate startups. I think what El Salvador is doing, what Stacey Herbert is doing with the Kubo training that's going on right now in El Salvador, training developers and helping place them in Bitcoin companies and bringing more Bitcoin companies to develop in the region. I actually think El Salvador will be one of the leaders in startups in the region. And part of that is the tax incentives too.
Yeah, it's actually quite incredible what they've done in such a short space of time and just really kind of embraced it. I'm really fascinated to go there actually just to see what's going on the ground. But I love the way that they seem to be hitting this from all sides, because they've done the kind of, obviously making Bitcoin legal tender. They've done some of the tax laws. And then they're also doing things like the Mi Premier Bitcoin program where, they're training up the whole new generation. So you're just going to have a pool of talent there that's going to be phenomenal. I mean, it's going to make the company so competitive on so many different fronts. So it's really quite fascinating. Do you get the sense that other countries in LATAM are watching El Salvador and thinking, we could get a piece of that pie too? Is there a sense there?
Yes, there is. But I think right now it's just been, I think there've been two attractive aspects of watching El Salvador. And I did talk to I was down in El Salvador the November after they adopted it as legal tender at the Adopting Bitcoin conference. I had a chance to talk to their then finance minister, and she said that the day they went with it, she has a WhatsApp group of all the finance ministers in the region that are sharing experiences and asking questions about how it's going and what they're running into. So there's definitely interest in the region. And Samson Mao has been visiting a lot of the countries, including Mexico, to talk about Bitcoin adoption and how it can, how it can do a number of things. I mean, in terms of tourism, the tourism growth in El Salvador has been phenomenal. And that's obviously an important driver of economics in the region, Mexico in particular. And then also remittances, how it facilitates a lowering of the expense of remittances. I think El Salvador's GDP is up a certain percentage of points, perhaps 10%, just on the reduced costs of sending remittances through the Chivo wallet that their family has in the US and in Canada and other parts, sending money to them directly. So remittances, tourism, and then what is just now starting, which I'm very excited about, is this building on Bitcoin. So the fact that they're not only encouraging the use of Bitcoin, which is still slow, but I think it's because people spend what they earn for the most part, and they haven't had the opportunity to become savers or investors up until this point. But I think having the opportunity to create job opportunities and think about things, that's why I'm so excited to work with this one startup coming out of El Salvador. And what a bright individual. And, and just really super exciting. But, I think those who are living it on the ground, who have the sandbox of, really seeing how it works and what the issues are, that they will be leading the adoption in other parts of the region and the world too. Same thing with Nigeria, I think is a leadership role in Africa in seeing how they're using it in solving so many problems. And the energy part is another one that, I'm seeing happening in Africa, but it certainly can happen in this region and other regions, on how you bring energy resources to areas that don't have electricity and don't have.
Is that a similar problem then? Because the only thing I think about when I think about this is totally like, I've never been to Latin America, but I just sort of imagine this very mountainous kind of landscape as you go down. And I keep thinking about how would you bring a container with all of the ASICs up that mountain? But is there a similar kind of use case there where you have areas with stranded energy or communities that don't have energy, where you could take the miners and have them run and set the whole grid up there, essentially using that for the economic value?
Without a doubt. I mean, I believe that Latin America is similar to Africa in that you have concentrations of population in certain areas, but then you have a lot of areas. I mean, I'm always amazed, like, if you travel the US, every inch of coastline is accounted for, and not so in Mexico. I mean, I wrote travel books to Mexico when I first arrived, and just driving down the coast, and you just see miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers of just empty virgin beaches, and still to this day. And so same thing when you go up into the mountains. So there are lots of areas that are very just a few houses or a few, so these sorts of opportunities definitely exist. And in the mining and then, throughout the whole region, throughout really the global South.
Yeah. I wanted to ask some of your thoughts about the Bitcoin adjacent technologies, just to touch on things like AI and Nostr. Like, how do you see all of those feeding into this and supporting the build out of Bitcoin apps and so on? And where do you see that going?
AI is something that I was really, really fascinated with, involved in. I mean, still am, but that was probably one of our primary technology that we invested in at Nita Ventures, and the Google startup, the Google Launchpad program in LATAM, which I've been a mentor in for many years. It's focused on AI. And so I really had a great opportunity to work with some of the top AI researchers in Google. I don't know. I mean, I think with AI, when I try and draw the line between AI and Bitcoin, I think the one thing that I see the biggest use case is almost like the micropayments I was talking about earlier, that Bitcoin could be adapted to be the payment format for AI usage. So instead of, like right now, you pay $20 a month for ChatGPT, but there will be multiple AIs in the universe. And so if Bitcoin becomes a payment network for powering AI usage and it becomes kind of automatic, then that would be how I see AI and Bitcoin kind of coming together. The other way would be just how easy AI is making it to program. And so I think on some of the development issues that I've talked about, the needs, and I don't even know that I can identify all the needs that we have in terms of helping Bitcoin evolve the way the internet evolved. I'm sure there are some use cases that I'm yet not thinking about, but it'll be easier to spin up a solution for it using AI to help you program and power that. But
it was interesting actually, because I had a chat with Andy Pitt as well from Ego Death Capital, and she said something similar. She was talking about the UX and the UI and saying that you can just use then at some point. I was asking her, I said, should more people be coming to the UI UX space then, if you're a young person looking to train? Because if the AI can now write the code, the need for a developer sort of gets reduced. As she said, well, actually, like the AI could design the user experience for you as well. So there's a whole question mark around where that industry goes.
Yeah, I mean, how rapidly AI is developing is just fascinating to me, and I'm very excited about the opportunities. I'm also very hesitant about it, because to my other point is that it also makes it very easy to duplicate or replicate identities. And so I think this is where, something like Bitcoin, where you have verified, in the blockchain proof of who that individual is, I think that identity verification will be an important part going forward. And that's almost like an anti-AI, but it's like, but I do think
it's a constraint on the AI self-replicating itself, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think like there's one company that I'm working with, that I've been working with out of the Google program, that is, it has a much more efficient algorithm for Spanish and LATAM use of AI, because most of the data sets in AI right now are English. And so that's where you have most of the opportunities. And so if you're using a chat bot on a Spanish language website in Mexico, it's a horrible experience, frankly. If I'm using an English language one in the US, I don't even know if it's a person or a chat bot, but definitely not the same experience here. So, having data sets that are, easier. I don't know how that ties into Bitcoin, but I do think that there are the micro payments related to AI usage, I think is where I see the biggest opportunity there. On Nostr, I love Nostr. I love the potential of Nostr. I love the fact that, I really resisted for a while, I think ever since it became apparent that Facebook was collecting information and selling it without user knowledge or authorization, that and making so much money off of individuals sharing of content, that there was a broken system. And Jason Lanier wrote a book years ago, I remember, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but it was basically about the fact that every person should own their own content and should get these micropayments. It was so way behind before his time, but it's like, that's where I see, if you're a creator and you can get rewarded personally for the things that you share with the community. And the more popular your content is, the more you're rewarded for it, versus the more Facebook makes of it from it, or Meta, then I think that's a tremendous shift. And so I really applaud what Nostr is building toward. And I think it's the future of this social communication.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah. There's so many problems around the way that social media works now, because not only is there the issue that content creators are not getting monetized directly, but then you've got the censorship issues, which are just, I mean, the societal implications of that are just huge. And so I was really pleased. I mean, I think it was sort of early December. No, I think it was either Christmas Eve, or I think it was Christmas Eve. I discovered Nostra anyway, and I just stayed up late and set myself up an account and was like, this is brilliant. Like, I can't believe this has finally arrived, freedom.
You're definitely an old G on Nostra then.
Well, I don't use it as much as I should, because to be honest, it's like the activity is still not as high as other services. But, to be honest, even since Elon Musk took over Twitter, there's still lots of problems with Twitter. And, things like the other day, people were showing how the Bitcoin hashtag was being suppressed. So if they just wrote something about Bitcoin, but they didn't hashtag it, it would have more likes or more views, more impressions. Just stuff like that, where I'm like, really, can't we all just have a nice open platform? Or things like, he suppresses Substack posts. So if you post your Substack articles onto Twitter, they get suppressed because he doesn't like their notes function, which, by the way, I hadn't even noticed they had this notes function. And when he started suppressing Substack, I went off and I looked at the notes function and I was like, oh, this is like Twitter, but with much better content.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, I mean, we went from a controlled social media platform controlled by the board, but public, to one that's, totally in the ownership of one individual. And so you hope the intentions there are correct and good, but everybody has their biases. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. But no, I think Nosta's a very, very exciting technology. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experiences with startups as well, if you have time, because you've obviously mentored a lot of them. Like, can you talk about sort of your experience mentoring accelerator programs and how that might have influenced your investment decisions?
But number one, I believe that I had, if I participated in these programs, I had insight into companies that were considered some of the best, and I had a chance of meeting them early on. So that was a selfish reason for participating. But in my entire life, I always feel like when you give back, you get more. And so I like participating. In fact, now, even though Meet to Ventures is no longer active, we're winding it down, I'm still continuing to mentor in these programs. And luckily, like with the Mass Challenge program, they identified the Bitcoin El Salvador company and put them with me because they know my interests. So I was grateful for that. But it's a range. It's like everybody needs help in different areas. And I think that in LATAM in the early days, you didn't have a lot of role models. And so you had young kids coming out of school who could be brilliant technicians. They were solving problems. They had zero business experience. And so even the thought of, they would come either with a big business plan or they wouldn't know how to present to an investor. And so just the whole way you communicate the opportunity of the problem that you're solving, it needs some work, or how you market, or how, to have brilliant engineers who would start a presentation with going through the entire back end of the technology and forget to tell you exactly what it is they do. And so you lose your audience right away. And obviously there are, each mentor has a different skill set. So probably my help that I bring to the table with these startups is communication and helping tell their story and helping identify how they grow, helping them form a plan for their team development and also for fundraising if they need it. And even though I've been in the VC space, I always encourage people, if you can do it on your own, investment is a factor of growth. So depending on what your goals are for the company and how fast you want to grow, depends on how much investment you need.
Yeah, interesting.
But I think as the region is growing. We do have more role models, and so now my focus is how to encourage some of these young entrepreneurs and startups and people who are thinking about, what the opportunities are in technology to really look at Bitcoin as a financial technology and the whole protocol and platform, and what enormous opportunities there are surrounding that.
There's definitely a trend of people from richer countries moving to LATAM. I see this like quite clearly. Do you think that that's going to change the investment space there as well?
I think, certainly, and we even saw this starting out with VC, but during COVID, Mexico never closed its doors. And so there was an influx, especially in Mexico City, there was an influx of people from all over the world, but especially from US and Canada that came to live, and many have stayed. So there's been an enormous influx of foreigners, of new foreign residents in Mexico City in particular and throughout the country. Absolutely, it changes things. I mean, I go to meetups often, even traditional tech meetups, and just the talent that's coming in, they can work remotely. And so they influence it, and then they like it and they want to stay here, or they might look for a job, or jobs are opening up. And so they want to take advantage of the opportunity, but it just helps bring in, I think, sharing of experiences, just as, I think somebody from Mexico or LATAM going to Silicon Valley can share experiences that, of what problems need to be solved or how you go about thinking about these economies. I would never have the perspective, had I not lived in this country, in this region, in this culture, I wouldn't understand how do you solve these problems as I do, having that personal experience.
Yeah, that's incredible. You've got a very unusual skill set given like your background and where you've lived and the journey that you've done. It's quite rare to have that combo together. So I guess we should end on, can you tell us when your book might be coming out? Because I'm dying to read it.
Well, I'm hoping, I always say I have probably more words than deserve to be in any book. So I have the content ready, and I'm now in the process of kind of whittling it down into a more succinct, readable version of it. I hope to finish by the end of the summer. I've been talking with 2 different publishers. So, then it goes to the editing process. I would love for it to be out before the end of the year. I am planning to do another Meet to Tech Talks in February, probably February of next year, but have it a Bitcoin centric Meet to Tech Talk. So instead of being on just the startup system, trying to convert that into what my interest is, and trying to support startups and investors working in the Bitcoin space, but also just general education as well for people in the region or that want to learn a little bit more. I don't think that there's a lot of conferences in the LATAM region geared for people who are not already Bitcoiners. So that would be my thought process. And so to release the book at that event or by that event, but sooner than later. I mean, I want to get it out. It should be pretty ready. It's just, the editing process kind of is where I am right now.
Are you doing an audio version as well? Say yes.
I will. Yeah, I definitely will. I definitely will do an audio version, and we'll quickly translate it into Spanish too, because I think a lot of just my natural lessons of having lived in LATAM and just my perspective, which I think is very different coming from Wall Street, but then having lived in LATAM and understanding from a firsthand basis what problems exist in the global South and in so many other parts of the world that Bitcoin solves. So, and I think just opening your eyes to that. I mean, when I talk to my friends that are in the United States, I say, well, what purpose does Bitcoin solve? And I go through a couple of scenarios, and it's like, oh, I never thought of that, So, because when everything works, you're not looking for another solution. So.
Yeah, that's true. I think that conversation is easy in Canada now. You just say, well, if you protest something the government doesn't like, they'll freeze your bank account. So how about that?
But prior to that, it was a harder conversation to have. So yeah, until it touches you, and then all of a sudden you have the need. So I'm a little fearful for the potential for a high inflation or for a collapsing currency. But it could happen, and I hope that doesn't. But and I have thoughts on how to solve that. But I just I would love to see U.S. Congress become a little bit more educated, not from a politicized standpoint, but really in terms of how beneficial it could be. I mean, I actually look at, you're talking about stable coins. I mean, I see putting in place a kind of a format or a protocol for the holding of U.S. securities in a transparent manner for stablecoins, whether it's a digital dollar or Tether or USDC or whatever. But if they have the formula already for money market funds, and if you just rate them based on the transparency and the amount of U.S. Treasuries they hold and the duration, that could replace the market of buyers for U.S. paper that has dissipated, especially since the Russia confiscation. But you've lost China, Russia, India, Venezuela. So most of the countries who purchase U.S. treasuries, are a lot more reluctant to do so. But a stable coin, which is a market that's growing phenomenally, could be an automatic buyer. So by opening perspectives about how the whole ecosystem can work together, I think is the way to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Lynne. This has been really fascinating. I look forward to your book coming out. Then I shall keep an eye on that, and good luck with finishing it. And just thank you so much for your time and for all the insights. It's been incredibly useful, incredibly interesting. So thank you.
Oh, and thank you for all that you're doing. I am right with you. I'd love to see more women in Bitcoin and more women builders. I love seeing that we have women investors in Bitcoin, between Elise and Andy. And I think that we've got some fantastic women in Bitcoin. We just need more of them. So anything I can do to help support it. And I know this is not strictly aimed at women, but just really support all that you're doing too. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, same to you. Thanks for being in the space.